me either the either or the either. I told you we're out of Phoenix now. Okay, alright!
Hi, you're listening to Magecast, the ensemble podcast by the well-read mage and a cast of mages. Each episode, I sit down with my rotating panel of guests to have some civil discourse about a single game. We're a group of games writers dedicated to long-form content and critique. You can find us on WordPress at thewellreadmage.com, on Twitter at thewellreadmage, and on YouTube. Crowdfunding support makes projects like Magecast possible. If you enjoy our work, written or otherwise, you can check out our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/thewellreadmage for more information on exclusives, rewards, and our vision for a future of better games writing and a friendlier gaming community. Links are in the description. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share Magecast with your fellow adventurers. Leave us a review, too. Oh, and now let's start the show. So it's saying starting recording, avoid legal snags by telling people they're being recorded. Hey guys, you're being recorded, just so you know. All right.
Also, can I just take a moment to say, this is like the most legendary meetup of legendary meetups. Just need to put that out there right now, man. Because like, we got Moses, we got the well-read mage, you got Daniel, the male ninja mage, and you got me, the hyperactive coffee mage. Arguably, like three of the most active members of our like team in one room together.
It's a trifecta of awesome. I mean, it's the Triforce. It's the Triforce.
You know
Easily.
What's funny too? I was walking down the stairs just like before, like getting everything going. I'm like, you know what? This is like the Triforce. Which one? First question: which of the three pieces of the Triforce do you most identify with?
Moses has got to be wisdom, right?
Oh, stop. I was going to say the pig one, whichever one that is.
How?
The pig one, I think that's what it's called, too.
The pig one, yeah. There's the Triforce of courage, the Triforce of wisdom, and the pig one. So, okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Magecast. This is the 8th episode, believe it or not. Let me double check that. Yes, indeed, it is the 8th episode of Magecast. Time flies when you're podcasting, apparently. I'm pleased today to be sitting down with two very important members of the well-read mage community, fellow mages of mine. Before we get to my guests today, before we talk about the game at hand, something I did want to bring up is keep an eye out for Magecast side quests led by the ABXY Mage. That's a second podcast we're going to be launching pretty soon. Do not have an exact date for it yet. It's better to be prepared before you launch something as large as a podcast, in my opinion, and in ABXY's opinion, which is why you haven't seen it yet. But keep your eye out for that soon, preferably, maybe, possibly, potentially after Thanksgiving or so. After tomorrow, we'll say that. Also, I want to give a shout out to our newest Warrior of Light, Kevin Harbin, who joined today as a white mage patron on Patreon. Thanks very much if you're listening. Appreciate it. I don't know who you are, but I will find you and I will give you a free high five. Now we'll get into the guest part of this podcast. I'm sitting down, as I say, with two mages. They are the Mail Order Ninja Mage, a.k.a. Daniel, and the Hyperactive Coffee Mage, a.k.a. Ryan. Thanks very much, guys, for joining me today. I just want to get into a little bit of an introduction here. Tell us sort of about yourself, what your shtick is. Tell us about some of the work that you've done online, what sort of content you're working on, and tell us about a game that you're playing right now. Let's start with you, Daniel.
Yeah, so my name is Daniel. Like you said, I run Home Button. So I'm the founder and the only writer for that site currently. My shtick is just trying to put my voice out on the internet. I kind of feel like, everybody can identify with somebody out there on the internet. So if I can just be that voice for somebody, then that's great. And I love to write. So, and video games are one of my biggest passions. So that just leads directly into home button. As far as what I'm playing right now is I started replaying Breath of the Wild, and it's all your fault because I had to get ready for this podcast, and now I'm playing through it again. I put almost 2 hours into it last night, and I have a billion other games to be playing, but
Like Breath of the Wild.
just sucks me in every time I turn it on. So
Yeah.
but outside of that, I'm trying to make my way through Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy Breath of the Wild. Your second playthrough, if you were to play it to completion.
Well, 2.5. I played about halfway through on the master difficulty, and it's not easy at all.
That's cool. I've yet to get into the DLC or any of that, but I really want to, especially after thinking about the game as much as I have been lately. And then my next guest is Ryan. Ryan, this is your second time appearing on this podcast. And
yes, it is.
So you know what's up. You know what's up. Go ahead and lay. You want me to lay you down a beat?
I prefer not.
Okay. He was like, it's late on my head.
You were totally expecting me to know that.
I have to say I'm very disappointed right now that there's not a beat laid down.
Okay, ready? My name is Ryan. Rhymes with what is your name Ryan with? I don't even know. And by the way, this is a singing podcast, gentlemen. We do a lot of singing on Magecast. So if you wanna lay out some simple and clean, that's fine with me. Ryan, I know you're a Kingdom Hearts guy. You like exude Kingdom Hearts. Okay, I'm gonna let you talk now. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, does whistling count as singing?
No.
Well, let me get the introductions out of the way. As you know, my name is Ryan. I am the writer for Games with Coffee. My shtick is games and coffee.
It's in the title. There you go,
it's in the title. So yeah. So I just write about what I feel about gaming, life, coffee, and just trying to juggle the many responsibilities of being an adult while still trying to be a gamer and a dad. Yeah, dad mode. So games I'm currently playing, and I have a large list actually. On the go right now, I've again started playing Breath of the Wild. I'm attempting master mode, so good luck to me.
Is it as hard as they say?
Oh my god, it's so hard.
Now I had trouble with parts of the normal game. I can't even imagine how difficult master mode is.
Okay, here let me break it down in this case. I was just running around, running away from bokoblins, which are a lot more tougher, and they recover health almost all the time. So even if you think you put a dent into their health, no, that's it. You have to consistently attack. And I was just running away, and the next thing I know, I bump into a silver Lionel, and I'm like, hold up, wait. I'm not expecting this. This is only on the Great Plateau, and I'm like, where do I run to? I need to hide.
Oh no, I hate those things.
But they're so much fun when you're actually more powered up. But when you're base and you have nothing more than a couple tree branches and maybe an axe, you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna go this way now.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you're replaying the game. I'm the only one of this trio of people on this podcast right now who has not replayed it yet, but I do want to. So getting into the podcast proper now, I want to start off with something that's a little more mellow of a question, because surprisingly, I do have to announce that this is the most divisive and controversial game we've ever covered on Magecast. Surprisingly, I was not expecting for it to be a game that was kind of like a love it or hate it sort of thing. But the more I talk to people about it, and I've been talking to people about it in the past week or so, and then putting it up on Twitter, of course, there are people who are like, yeah, Breath of the Wild. And then there are people who are like, oh man, Breath of the Wild. So I thought that was interesting. But to start off with, a not so inflammatory question. Why is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild the best Legend of Zelda?
That's a big question. And you're right, it's the best Zelda. So that's not going to make anybody angry, right?
No. Yeah, that's a perfectly benign question. Come on. I don't even know if that was the correct use of the word benign, but I used it anyway. This is my podcast. Okay, a word means exactly what I expect it to mean when I use it. Okay.
Well, technically, you did actually use the word in the proper context. It is a pretty benign question.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Yeah, the vocabulary failed me in this moment, but I appreciate the thesaurus backup. But let's, Daniel, you know what? I'm not going to have you answer that question because that's a little ridiculous question. But to sort of kick right off, what are some impressions and highlights, just thoughts that you have when somebody says The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild? What comes to your mind?
For me, it's
world.
Yeah,
Sorry,
vast world. No, I'm sorry. The very first thing that I think of is that first moment where you walk out on that plateau. For me, that was one of those moments in gaming that only happens a few times in your life where, you first play Mario for the first time. It was that kind of impact for me.
Yeah, I have to agree. That's an iconic moment that's recent in gaming. But it felt so impactful to stumble out of that cave into the broad daylight and this vast, literally vast area in front of you where you could go anywhere and do anything. So very, I don't want to say necessarily different, and we'll get into elements of uniqueness and stuff like that. But even a lot of open world games still funnel you into certain directions. But there's a severe lack of linearity in Breath of the Wild. In the beginning, in the opening part of it, you're sort of following the old man around. But once the game flowers and it opens up, then it's like, do whatever you want, And that might not appeal to everybody when a game says you could do whatever you want. You could cut down a tree and roll it into a bunch of moblins, or you could magnetize your weapon and throw it around like a boomerang. But some of those things, some of the cool stuff that you could do. What about you, Ryan? What are some highlights, impressions about Breath of the Wild?
I mean, Daniel already kind of said it right there, but I remember when I first played it, and I was super excited to get this. So when I first sat down, turned it on, and put it on, and then just walked out. There was just a sense of awe. There's so much to see. I've never seen an open world this big. This was one of the first games I've just thought this is as open a world as you can get. And then just seeing that camera pan, from one side of the I guess from the plateau to another, just that sweeping arc. It was just, I don't know, there was just beauty and magic in that shot. And I'm like, I have to take a capture. Second, I just have to sit and just take it in. I don't think I moved from that spot for about a good minute or two as I was just moving the camera, just looking around and seeing just how amazing this world looked. So yeah again, it's just the vastness.
Yeah, it was easy to try to prolong that moment as long as you could because it felt so good. Now there are bigger open worlds now, right? I mean, there are bigger games than Breath of the Wild. I don't know that. Was Horizon Zero Dawn bigger or smaller?
I think it was a bigger world maybe, but there's something about just made it feel epic from the start. And maybe it was just the series, the franchise, just the backing that it had behind it going in. But the minute you step on that plateau, it just feels like such a large world that you want to explore and live in. And other games obviously do this too. I've been playing Red Dead Redemption 2 recently, and that game is enormous and massive. But it and Zelda kind of have something in common where it slows down, and you actually want to be in that world. So even though some of them may be larger per square inch, that they don't. Zelda just has an epic feel to it that translates, instantly in that first pan shot.
Right. And I remember a concern before Breath of the Wild came out from gamers was that it was going to be huge but empty. There were people saying that the wilderness seemed featureless, that it seemed like it was just going to be one big empty slate. And that was a concern that I had too, just in hearing about that. Is that a potentiality getting into this game? But in starting to play the game, it really seemed like there was something everywhere. Like if I saw a mountain in the distance and the climbing mechanic, I could just go climb it. Like I could climb anything. That mechanic alone is something that I want to see in every open world game now.
I agree.
Like, yeah. I played Horizon Zero Dawn after Breath of the Wild. And obviously there are things from Horizon Zero Dawn that I would want in Breath of the Wild to create sort of this perfect fusion. But something that I wanted in Horizon from Breath of the Wild was I wish I could climb everything. I wish I could climb that waterfall. I wish I could climb that skyscraper. I wish I could climb that mountain. And you just can't. But in Breath of the Wild, you can. And not just, I could get up there. But it always seemed like there was some little reward, some reward for your drive to explore. Something, whether it was a tiny Korok under a rock or behind a little mini game, or whether it was some other little tidbit item or a miniature side quest through a NPC, something had to happen every time you climbed up something, it felt like. So the game feels full. It feels like it was living. It felt like it was alive. There was something that I recalled on Breath of the Wild's treatment of open world structure. This is from the blog Extra Life Reviews. Wanted to give a shout out to @RedMetal14 for this. But I remember reading that he said, he or she, I'm not sure. But they said Breath of the Wild is sort of an outsider's take on the open world genre. Breath of the Wild by Nintendo took on a very Western genre of games, a very Western structure of games, but they were a Japanese company, not accustomed to open world game design. Certainly, Nintendo isn't exactly known for open world games, but it seems like their perspective on that structure as an outsider allowed them to do things a little differently. One difference that I like to say is that playing Breath of the Wild didn't feel like playing a mini map and just moving from icon to icon to icon until I completed. It felt like you really had to move throughout the world, think laterally, and able to get through different areas. So there was a particular island, Daniel, that you brought up in our talks earlier. And even now, I can't even remember the name of it.
It's Eventide Island.
Right. That was in the extreme southeast of the map, right?
Right.
What was the whole deal with that?
So what kind of blew my mind about that place, and because of the nature of Breath of the Wild, right, you could have ended up there hour 5 if you really tried to. They put some things in place to make it really hard to get over there if you didn't have certain abilities and items. But if you were really crafty with the way you could get there early. But for me, it was somewhere around hours into the game when I discovered the island. Just like anything else in Breath of the Wild, I wasn't following a map point or anything like that. I just was like, there's something over there. I want to go see what it is. So I actually got on a boat and used a Korok leaf to get over there to the island because my parachute wasn't leveled up high enough my stamina wasn't leveled up high enough to fly there.
See, so we got there in different ways then. So that's a difference.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of indicative of this entire game, right? Like me and you went to the same island, had the same experience. We got there entirely different ways. And you could have done it at hour 5, and I did it at hour 40, but we still both got there. And we had a personal story to tell along the way, even if it was just something as small as, navigating a boat out there. But,
right. And once you got there, you were stripped of gear, right?
Right. Yeah, they take away everything you have. And for me, I'm at hour 40, right? So I have like all kinds of cool weapons, and they take everything away, and they're like, hey, you're stranded on this island until you're done here. So now figure out what you're going to do. Like, they took you to the beginning of the game and said, okay, cool, now you have nothing again, but you have an understanding of the underlying mechanics of the game. Now do it all over. And so you kind of crept around the island finding, sticks again, where you were using giant broadswords. Now you have sticks again, and you've got no armor. And did you guys both made it to the island, right? There's a big Hinox on the island. Yeah, so you got to like navigate around that Hinox, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do it to complete the puzzle, right? How did you guys solve that puzzle?
I don't recall exactly, but I remember using fire. I can't remember. I think I magnetized the barrels and threw them at his face or something. I can't remember exactly, but it's interesting that and I think that this kind of bridges into like emergent gameplay, where it's like you get there and there's relatively simple mechanics there that you're already familiar with for having played the game, but it's even more simplified with a lack of gear. And so you're not even told explicitly, like imagine, I think this would be more typical if you were to reach the island and then an NPC greeted you there to say, this is the island of whatever, and you can't use any of your gear, and these are the things that you have to accomplish on this island. The game doesn't really do that a whole lot. It sort of says, these are like the base rules now, but you need to figure it out. You need to figure out how to get that friggin' orb on top of that little tiny outcropping of rock, which took me forever, by the way, to figure out. But I was so proud of myself when I figured out how to get that orb on top of the thing without a bunch of different things. Ryan, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. That's what I just love about Breath of the Wild. It's the fact that it's very minimalist in its presentation, and how it gives you, it only gives you like the barest of bones, and then expects you, the player, to just kind of figure it out along the way. I fell in love with that. Sometimes I wish there were a lot more games had that approach personally, but Nintendo really made it work.
I think that you typically find that sort of problem solving, lateral thinking, like using a creative method to overcome problems. So like problems in Breath of the Wild had multiple solutions, as we've discussed, in just reaching Eventide Island itself. But then once you're there, how do you get things done? I think that we most usually see lateral thinking in puzzle games, where you're like, well, how do I overcome this situation? I felt like that was really true of an indie I played earlier in the year. I think it was called Hemispheres, or was it Semispheres? Something along those lines. It was like a twin stick puzzle game where you had to control two different jellyfish and swap between them and then reach the end of this little mini map thing. But it really felt like I had to think creatively to get around its problems. Now, I think once a game gets bigger and more complex, it's likely harder to implement that many different solutions because there are that many more problems to solve. And within Breath of the Wild, there are who knows, millions of different potential problems to solve, whether you're creating your own problems or thinking of things that you want to accomplish. I want to reach this island. I want to reach this mountain. How do you get there? So you'll always have to be thinking on your toes, it felt like, when you're playing Breath of the Wild. And very rarely are they like, hey, there's an icon, go get it and bring it back here. And that's how you solve this problem. It doesn't tell you how to solve the problem. You have to figure that out for yourself.
Right, and going back to the Hinox on Eventide, it was exactly that for me, because my brother and me were playing through at the same time, and he was talking about this epic fight he had with the thing, and I crawled up onto its hand because I noticed it would scratch its nose. So if you crawl up onto its hand, he'll lift his arm up and you'll fall on his belly, and then you could just grab the orb off his necklace and take off without ever fighting him if you wanted to. And of course, he usually wakes up when you jump off him and you're running with this orb over your head as he chases you across the wall. But I think that right there is indicative, like, we all had different things that happened when we fought this guy, but nobody said, well, if you, and no, there's no tip that hopped up, right, that said, oh, hey, have you tried crawling on the Hinox's hand?
Yeah. It wasn't like, hey, listen, and then it tells you, this to happen and that to happen. Where it's like, I'm sure there's fans of Ocarina of Time listening, but in terms of implementing ingenuity and like demanding ingenuity from the player, Breath of the Wild is like really high up on the list.
What made it feel so special to me? I don't know if you guys are old enough to. I'm pretty old, so I remember going to the playground, right, and talking to kids about video games and something like Final Fantasy VI, right, when they were talking about, oh, hey, if you go kill these monsters and you go to General Leo's gravesite and you use a Phoenix down, you can get right. Or you would go back like, oh my God, I did this thing, and they're like, no way, I got to go home and try this. Breath of the Wild felt like that for today, which blew my mind, because I was going to friends and being like, did you know you can get a skeleton horse and you can ride to the thing and it'll explode in the middle of the daytime? And they're like, well, no way. Whoa. And they have to go. And so it's that kind of stuff that just blew my mind and made it feel like something really special from my childhood. But in modern times with the internet and, my group of friends that was two guys that cared is now thousands of people that I could share those experiences with.
Yeah, that's real cool. Because I remember back in the day, sort of the same thing. I'm 33. I don't know how old you are, but I remember saying things like that for Final Fantasy VII. There were things like that in Breath of Fire 2, a game that I played a lot of. RPGs, all the Earthbound stuff like that. Final Fantasy 4, where it's like, oh, we make up stuff, and it's like, well, you can't invalidate that on the spot. They have to go home and try it out for themselves, Oh,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and then it was sort of, the internet sort of killed that aspect of gaming for years, because it was like, well, you could just look up a secret. The game just came out and there's already walkthroughs out, there's already let's plays, there's already tons of information at your disposal to aid you in playing this game. I actually do remember at one point that I was playing Breath of the Wild in one of the many, many, many dungeons in the game, the shrines. I could not solve the problem, and I cannot remember exactly what it was, but I went online to look and there was nothing. And I remember being like, what? Is this the internet age? How is there no information on this problem? Like, I need something. Come on. But either nobody solved the problem yet, or nobody had solved it and written on it yet, or did a video on it yet, or what have you. So that was a cool feeling too, to be like, I just have to buckle down and figure this out. I have to be smarter than this game. And by golly, it's a smart game. So it can be tricky to solve sometimes. We'll talk about, I want to touch on longevity, Daniel, since you brought up the game's legs. And we'll talk about
legs.
Yeah, the game's legs. Zelda's legs. All right.
Okay.
Hey, it's the Legend of Zelda's legs. So
there's so many ways the sentence can go.
I just drank water. I was about to spit up all over my computer. You guys.
All right. So to reference
Poor timing.
Sorry.
to reference a conversation we'd had earlier, Daniel, we were talking about the game's longevity. We'll say that rather than Zelda's legs. And you were remarking that you think that this game will have a lot of longevity. And I agreed. I said that it was a landmark title that I think we'll keep looking back toward. Now, why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, if you just want to look at it at a baseline level, right? The graphics, the way they did the graphics they're the kind of graphics that are going to hold up for a long time, like you have with Wind Waker, right? It's a very stylized look, very painterly, and so going back to play this game 10 years, I think even 20 years in the future, it's still going to be presentable enough that you're going to be able to play it and not feel like you're playing some kind of polygonal mess, right? And then, but to me, I played almost 250 hours of this game so far, and there's almost no games out there that I've put that kind of time into that I can look back on with fondness, but I don't want to necessarily start over. But if you told me tomorrow, hey, you could only have one game today, it won't be a new one. I would say Breath of the Wild, because I want to start back over in that world. I want to be in that world, and I think that world is what's going to give it its longevity, right? Because it's such a interesting and fascinating place to explore, and I think it did honestly evolve the genre of open world games by such leaps and bounds that I think even something like Red Dead hasn't quite caught up to what Breath of the Wild did special.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think, gosh, I'm trying to strain to think what all the games were that I played recently, but I'm just gonna say because Horizon stands out in my mind. Horizon and Breath of the Wild are very contemporary games. You know, they came out around the same time. But it really did seem like Horizon was much more by the books. To its credit, because that is a great game. But it didn't take as many risks, I think, as Breath of the Wild. And certainly I haven't met as many people who are like, ugh, Horizon Zero Dawn, or, oh, Horizon Zero Dawn is, this landmark title that, deserved to win Game of the Year and all that. I mean, there are some people that talk like that. But the point being, I think that Horizon, much more traditional open world gaming, good, but Breath of the Wild, much more innovative on that concept of the open world.
I find that I agree. One of the things that really caught me about Breath of the Wild versus like other open games was like, again, like if we're talking about the visuals again, like what Daniel was saying, is just how crisp everything looked. It wasn't like the cell shading wasn't so animated that it was just like, okay, this is just like a very animated, not very realistic kind of game. But at the same time too, on the other hand, it's just how the visuals look in the game is just that, like, if you go in like 5 or 10 years in the future and you think back to a Legend of Zelda that really stand out in your mind, probably the first one will come up will be Breath of the Wild, just because of how visually appealing the game is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful game. Very gorgeous game.
Gorgeous. If it was up to me, right, I would spend every waking day, like every waking living day, just like in that version of Hyrule. I think that version of Hyrule, Breath of the Wild's version of Hyrule, is the definitive version of Hyrule. I mean, it's the version of Hyrule that will be. It's the version of Hyrule I think every other Zelda game is going to be built up on. You can't go back to it.
Those are high words.
No, you can't. No, I'm serious. You can't go back to Ocarina of Time's version of Hyrule. You can't go back to even Twilight Princess's version of Hyrule. And Twilight Princess's was huge. And I remember when I started playing Twilight Princess, I was like, oh my gosh, this is huge. I can't believe how massive this world was. And then I played Breath of the Wild and I'm like, okay,
it's bigger, yeah.
Well,
now, do you mean also in thematic terms, like I would hope that we're not looking purely at dystopian Zeldas from now on. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. The whole theme here is the fact that like Link wakes up 100 years into the future, where like there is virtually no Hyrule. Hyrule Castle is a ruin where people, bravely tried to pick its treasures from the infested, miasma-filled ruins, and like civilizations just like kind of pocketed in certain areas of the world. There's no Hyrule Castle town. There's no grand sweeping Temple of Time or anything. Everything is in ruins, and you're looking around and you're thinking, what happened here? But it would be interesting to see that the complete opposite, and like a version of Legend of Zelda where it's the complete opposite, where they're in a golden age of Hyrule, where everything is bright, fresh, and lively. Like it's like basically a living world. So to speak,
Right. So you mean like in terms of the scale then, right? And in terms of the grandeur of Breath of the Wild, preserve that, but in a sort of sense, have free to move across that timeline.
Yes.
Right now, this kind of takes us to, we actually got a couple questions about a sequel. As we know, they're already working on the next Zelda game. Now, I agree with Retro Revelations on Twitter, who said, I don't necessarily want a Breath of the Wild 2. I'm going to say that I don't want a Breath of the Wild 2 also, but in terms of, I don't want this exact same game just with a different story. I want them to continue to innovate. I don't necessarily want to see, just like the 200, or I can't even remember how many shrines there are again.
120.
Yeah, okay, that's a lot. I as great as that is, I'm glad that Breath of the Wild is a compact experience. And I don't necessarily want that to overly define the future of the Zelda series. Now, I think that it's a mistake when people say Breath of the Wild is the first open world Zelda game. I think that's false. The very first Legend of Zelda on the NES is an open world game. We just don't think of it as an open world game because it was well before we started using that term in terms of a trend of game design. But the fact that you can go anywhere at any time during that game and find secrets and find dungeons in different orders means that's an open world game, So the Zelda series has always been open world, but I think there's still so much room for growth and still so much that they could improve upon, maybe in terms of a story, in a Breath of the Wild sequel, or in the next Zelda, whatever that happens to be. But what are your guys' opinions on a sequel for this game, or on the next Zelda? Do you think we'll get a sequel, or do you think we'll just get the next Zelda game that sort of builds upon and innovates upon this experience?
I hope we get a sequel, honestly. Either a sequel or a prequel. I could go either way, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if it's just a huge DLC pack or a standalone thing you can purchase, like you saw with Torna with Xenoblade 2. Mm-hmm. But there is so many interesting stories still to tell in that world. Like, right. You guys were talking about a Breath of the Wild type of world where we could see everything in its heyday. Well, we could easily do that with these same characters, same character model, same world, but go back and see a completely restored Hyrule Castle in this game, because we're living in the Fallout 100 years past, and there were some epic things like the battle at Fort Hateno, where the Guardians, where they'd had their last stand, right, with Link,
right,
or where there's this huge fortress. I can't remember the name, but it's like a castle where there was a barracks where all these Hylian soldiers stayed. And it was up in the mountains, and if you go there in the game now, you can only really get the story from journals, but you see like all the flying guardians surrounding it. It's very bleak and desolate. You see like shattered like instruments of war where you can see how this fell apart, and it's kind of like got a Minas Tirith feel, right? It's like up in the mountains. I could see them visiting that, or at the end of the game, Zelda, I assume we're doing spoilers, obviously. Right?
Yeah, every single Mage cast is a spoilers podcast.
Okay, I thought so. I've listened to enough of them. I thought so, but so obviously at the end, Zelda and Link are heading off to remake this world and to like bring the people back together. I would love to see that story also.
Yeah. So now I do agree with you. I don't mean in terms of. So let's separate the thought of like a Breath of the Wild 2 and another Zelda game. Because each of the Zelda games are fairly distinct from each other, telling stories across these varying timelines. I would not mind seeing a DLC, like a big DLC, like you're talking about, either going into the past or into the future to see how they redeem the ruins or how the ruins came to be. I think that I agree with you. There's a lot of story to tell. But I would still say that I wouldn't want to see. I would want to see a Breath of the Wild 2 be like, this is Breath of the Wild 2, rather than the next Zelda game just be just this. If that makes sense, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And Ryan, I'd be interested to hear your take on this. Like, I don't know that we could go back, honestly. Like, is there a place now for the traditional 3D Zelda when we've taken this big a leap? For me now, I think their big play would be to have your 2D Zeldas that you top down traditional, and that's where you get that sort of gameplay. And then now you have this new open world environment. I just don't know how you move forward with that.
No, I agree with you. Well, let me first preface this by saying, me personally, I wouldn't want to see a Breath of the Wild sequel. I think in terms of the next Zelda, I think it should build up on what made Breath of the Wild great, and then just tell a brand new story. Maybe even a story that like ties into, I guess you could say, ties into how we got to Breath of the Wild in a sense. Like, so maybe not like a sequel, maybe a prequel. But I don't know. One question I read, and Moses, I hope you don't mind if I pull out that question. Actually, it was on my Twitter when I retweeted this, and it was from Katie Martin, and she asks, "What timeline does Breath of the Wild take place in?" Because I thought it was if Link died facing Ganon in 008, but then Zelda has a foot in Breath of the Wild that connects it to Twilight Princess, which is the second timeline, right? So again, we're going back to the diverging timelines. If it was up to me, I'd like to see a game where the two timelines converge, and then the eventual result kind of creates a golden age for Hyrule, which then leads into Breath of the Wild. But again, that's my wishful thinking.
Yeah, a Zelda game that addressed the multiple timelines. I haven't played all the Zelda games, but I'd like a Zelda game that kind of explained what the heck is going on, because there's so many where it's just like, what? And I tried reading up on it on various, fan sites and wikis and stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't get this. It's pretty deep stuff.
Yeah,
right.
And then again,
Nintendo came out and said like, they basically said we don't really care about the timeline. Like, we're gonna make whatever we want to make. And because if you look at this game, right, there's so much from all these different games, and some of them are from conflicting timelines. Because at the beginning of the game, they talk about the hero of Twilight, the hero of Time, and the hero of the oceans. And then they also later you see the Leviathan, the whale from Skyward Sword. His bones are on a different part of the map, so they connect. They add all these connective tissues to this game, and they're like, but they're like, well, where does this take place? And they're like, yeah, I think I don't have the exact quote, but he was basically like, I don't know, man. Like, it's somewhere.
Which is great, because that allows the developers to not be constrained by a timeline that's rigid or a set of timelines that's rigid. So like a comparison that immediately jumps to my mind. I'm a comic book fan, been reading comic books for a long time. DC Comics has got 80 years worth of timelines to wrestle with, and they've wrestled with that over time by destroying their multiverse, by building it back again, by saying this is canon, oh now this is not canon anymore, by having these huge crises, these multiverse level events that'll crash things and kill characters. And so that helps writers work within a certain field. But I think what they found over time is that that's overly restricting to writers who maybe will just want to tell the stories that they want to tell, whether that be a traditional Batman story or whether that be a version of Wonder Woman that they want to just get out and implement into a new series. So I think that they arrived at a variety of ways to overcome sort of a timeline issue. But I appreciate by Nintendo that essentially they're just saying, well, we're just going to do whatever we want, which is sort of Nintendo's tagline anyway. It seems like
basically.
They're just like, I don't care. Like we're going to do what we want and screw you guys anyway. If you like it, you like it. If not, we'll still be here in 10 years.
Exactly. And I kind of want to go back to Daniel's original question, where he asked me my thoughts about the multiple types of Zeldas, right? So we have, we have the traditional top-down classic Zelda, where you go in, there's a set number of dungeons and stuff, and then you have this grand open world Zelda. And I feel like I know there's a comparison there somewhere to Super Mario, because right now we have the traditional platformers, and we have Mario Kart and Mario RPG and Mario RPGs, and I feel like Zelda can kind of do that, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Have the traditional on one end, and then have the open world on another, but they're not totally connected to one another. Like they can just kind of branch off between the two, and create different adventures, but have them still have the game still satisfy a core component of their audience, while having the open world satisfy another core component of their audience. You know what I mean? That's my thinking on that.
Yeah. I mean, and then really Nintendo's pretty dang good at ensuring that their series have longevity. I mean, Mario's been around for over 30 years. Legend of Zelda has been around for 30 years. How many other series have been around that long that are still chugging? That are still doing pretty good. I mean, Metroid's been around for such a long period of time. We're going to get Metroid Prime 4 pretty soon. Sure, yeah, they kind of let Star Fox fall by the wayside for a little bit until he cameoed in Starlink. I haven't played it, so I don't know if that's a cameo or not, if that's fair.
Played it, beat it. Oh my god. That's all I'm going to end up right there now. Oh my god.
Well, we'll have to do a Starlink episode eventually someday. So we kind of nailed this question already. This is from Esper Dreams on Twitter. Kate, she asked, what direction would you want the series to do differently, or would you rather it stay the same? I think we answered that, but we got a second question here from her, which was, should there be new heroes for future games or stick with Link? And that plays into a rumor that Link or a new character was going to be female in the next game. How do you guys feel about new heroes for Legend of Zelda?
Let me play as a character who every game is named after. It's about time, right? Zelda, first of all, we're going to get into it in a minute with the story, right? But
yes,
Zelda is essentially story-wise the main character of Breath of the Wild. And she's not a Zelda that we've seen before. She is a character that has multiple dimensions to her. And the next Zelda should have Zelda in it. And even if either you play as Zelda, or let's play as a female Link, if that's the case, because honestly, Link has never been okay, it has to be a boy. The story universe, it just says that a Link, a Zelda, and a Ganon will always come back.
Right. Sort of this reincarnating cycle.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's no reason why we can't have a female lead. And especially after this last one. I want to see a Zelda.
Yeah.
Run
No,
around.
I
so much in agreement.
totally agree. Yeah. I think that and obviously there's always backlash. This is the gaming culture, but it's like, no, how dare you change? Remember when they showed Link in Breath of the Wild with a blue tunic instead of a green one, and people were like, it's not Zelda if he doesn't have a
my
green
God.
tunic. It's like, guys, go ahead. A green tunic is the definition of superficial. Like, if they can get the rest of if the game's great, who cares about a green tunic? But anyways, I digress. I would definitely like to see new characters. I think that they can continue to evolve and innovate and tell new stories. You touched, Daniel, on Zelda's character in Breath of the Wild. This game is about Zelda. Really, I think for the first time, like I said, I haven't played all the Zeldas, but there's not a Zelda before where I was like, oh yeah, this game's about Zelda. Typically in the past, she's kind of been just like an object in the game or an objective. And then Link has just kind of been like, an audience, what's the word? Cipher. The person that your perspective character, point of view character, where you just see the world through him. But he didn't really have that much personality himself. Courage is kind of the thing that's his shtick. But in this game, though, they could have really called it The Legend of Zelda Silent Princess. That, correct me if I'm wrong, was the name of the flower in the game, right? That blue and white flower, which is in the logo. Okay, it is correct. Which is in the logo, and it's also in the final shot of the game once you complete it, right? Link and Zelda are walking down the hillside talking about how they're going to rebuild, as was mentioned. And we get this pan over and it zooms in on the Silent Princess flower. So really focusing on Zelda is something that I think Breath of the Wild does great. It gets us into her mind, her insecurities, her wrestling with her duties, her wrestling with what she wants to do. She didn't come off as a typical Disney princess. Well, I don't want to be a princess anymore. Like it didn't feel like that sort of cliche stereotype. But it felt like she had depth, and that was really, really refreshing. I think for this series especially.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. This Zelda has to be my favorite interpretation of Zelda, of all the Legend of Zelda games I've ever played, just because of how much characterization, how much humanization. I mean, the voice acting aside, whatever. I mean, everyone's divisive about the voice acting. I personally liked Zelda's voice acting. It's it was great.
Yeah, I'm a little on the fence about voice acting in this game, but go ahead, as you were saying.
As I was saying, no, but I just loved how they presented her character. This really is a game about Zelda and about her feelings and her insecurities and just everything that just kind of happens to her. And like Link is more or less the audience. He's
discovering that in his remembering. He's discovering those things about Zelda again, and so you get to discover them through him. And it's such an idea to explore. Like, who was this woman? And think about too. This is a Zelda game that's built on our hero's failure. Link failed. And Zelda failed in the past, and that's how we got this terrible, ruined world. So you're already starting out with broken characters and not with perfect, heroic stereotypes. You're starting out with people who have got to redeem themselves, who have got to rediscover things, who have got to learn things, and all that. And it makes them much more interesting characters, Zelda especially.
And I'm sorry, I know I've been rambling a lot here, but
you ramble on, sir. This is a podcast.
that's the whole point of a podcast, right? If you can't ramble here, where can you ramble? But Zelda, first of all, the story, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more. People, when Breath of the Wild first came out, people were like, "I love the exploration, love this, but there's no story." And I just would look at them like, what game are you playing? Because the one I'm playing, first of all, the way they did Zelda and Link blew my mind when I first started playing it, because you start getting these memories and you're like, wait a minute, she doesn't like Link. She, like, you see little tidbits of like, she is angry at Link and you don't know why. And so there was a part where I said, screw the main game. I'm going to go find memories because I want to know why.
Right.
Why is she mad at Link? And you get those tidbits over time of like, I'm supposed to be this thing. I'm supposed to stop Ganon. It's been prophesized that that's what I'm going to do, but I can't make these powers manifest. And I'm passing out in the cold trying to like make this happen, and I can't happen. And here this dude just walks along, gets a magic sword, and he's suddenly the great hero. And the ironic thing is, and what's so cool about Zelda in this game is that when they get to the battle at Fort Hateno, Link is defeated by the Guardians finally after taking a ton of them out, and he's dying, and that's when her powers activate, and she shuts down that entire field full of Guardians. She saves Link, and then she gets Link to the right people. She stores the Master Sword, and then she goes to fight Ganon by herself. Right. And when she goes to fight Ganon, she actually survives and holds him in that castle this entire time, waiting for Link to wake up. So this entire time, and then as you play the game, you think she's dead like the other champions. So when you find out at the end, oh, she's alive. This 100 years she's been waiting for me. Well, I've been chasing this deer down so I could try to ride it across the field. She's been using all her power to hold Ganon at bay. That is such a cool character development there. And I mean, yeah, her voice sometimes. I mean, I thought the British thing was cool, but and sometimes they zoomed in on her butt just to show it was a butt. But I mean, outside of that, it was like, yes, this is what I want from my Zelda games.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. You want those characterizations. You want the interaction. I did the same thing with the memories. I reached a point where I collected a couple of them, and I was like, this is a really interesting subtext that's starting to come out. And so I did the same thing. I stopped and I specifically pursued collecting all of the memories together to get that past and learn about this character who essentially is the hero of this game, Zelda. Link's been just chilling in his little comatose neon bed for all this time, and Zelda's the one that's been setting everything up and paving the way for that final confrontation. And I think too, right, that Zelda is the one that delivers the killing blow on Ganon, right? You actually fight him, but then there's the cutscene. She comes out and she does her magic, and that's it. So yeah, the story's about her for sure. Daniel, you mentioned getting into the story a little bit more. I didn't have this whole story section planned too in depth. Is there something specific that you wanted to touch on with the story? Oh,
I'm so glad you asked. So, and I think what's so fascinating about this from the very get-go, right, is once you get along and you meet Cass, who's like this person who writes ballads and goes around singing about it, like, you find out that this Zelda is not only, we've had 10,000 years. That's how far they've set this Zelda apart from the other ones. We've had 10,000 years where we have developed technology to stop Ganon from ever having to worry about Ganon again. Like, we are going to make these things so we don't have to worry about having Link. We're going to make these huge monstrosities. And in the story, you find out those things beat Ganon the last time he was here. And so they think it's going to work again, but when he comes back, he's ready for them. And that's when he takes them over, right? And kills the champions that were driving them, and then defeats everybody because they became so reliant on the technology that they weren't worried about the problem anymore. But I think what that does is a few things. It sets up, like you said, first we have this fascinating way, because the story was set up the way it was set up because this is an open world game, right? And open world games typically struggle with story in a lot of ways, because how do you give somebody access to this entire world to start without siphoning them off to different directions, but also have an engaging story that we can move along? So
right. Yeah, like the tension in an open world game is typically not there, because It's like, here's the stuff that's about to go down, but you can go pick some mushrooms for 10 hours if you want. And that kind of throws off all of the tension. It would be like if you're reading a novel. And I know the specific novel that I want to reference, Moby Dick. Okay. Either they set out on the Pequod, I think it was called. And they're like about to go catch this whale. And I'm like, I'm ready for some high seas adventurer. And then you get dropped with what felt like DLC chapters, like 4 or 5 of them, of like whale information. Like, here's what they do with the whale oil. Here's cetology in the stars and all this stuff. And I was like, dude, this is super boring right now. Like, it deflates all of the tension from the storyline. And essentially, too, a lot of games, take all of that out. But anyway, go ahead. As you were saying, Daniel.
No, I was just, so basically the setup lets you, because he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't really know who Zelda is. He doesn't know what happened 100 years ago. He has to piece that together. So as you piece that together, like you said, the tension kind of increases to the point where you're like, okay, I've got to go fight Ganon. But the whole time, even because it's a game, right? We have to have a concession where like, yeah, okay, we know where you're going to go, mess around and Hyrule and run and just ride your horse and stuff like that. That's fine. But at the same time, it gives him a reason to be out there doing all of that. He's reconnecting with this world. He's powering up so that he can defeat Ganon. And you can do it at any time, right? You can go straight to to Hyrule Castle, and you can fight him with a stick in your underwear.
Your trousers on, and like muscle.
Right, exactly. And the Guardians too are the champions, not the Guardians. The champions were such a cool. I loved the champions. And here's where I want to ask first of all is, what did you think of the champions, and which one was your favorite? I have an answer to this too, but I want to hear what you guys have to say on the matter.
Ryan, go ahead.
Okay, sure. I'll share. So let's see. Yes, I loved the introduction. The introduction, of the champions. I thought it was a really refreshing take on the 4 different races that are predominant in the Zelda mythos. So we have the Zoras, we have the Gorons, we have the Vito, and we have the Gerudo. And just having those 4 introduced, it really brought such a refreshing vibe to the game, and I love their inclusion. And as for my favorite,
Urbosa.
Yes, I'm like, what is her name again? But yes, I love Urbosa. She's just such a, and please forgive me for saying this, but she is such a badass, and I absolutely love her. She's so great.
Yeah, so I like the champions. I think that this game needed characters. It needed a cast. Imagine without the champions, you would not have a whole lot going on. You'd have a couple of NPCs that you get familiar with in the towns, and then that's it. But they stay in their isolated areas. These could be recurring characters in the memories, in the big dungeons, that you could get familiar with over time that had their own history. My least favorite was probably Falco. I just didn't like his watch out, Star Fox kind of attitude.
Rivali. Yeah.
Rivali, yeah.
Worst.
He's grating. I like that they sort of redeem some of that attitude toward the end of the game, as I recall, but I haven't played this game in a year, you guys. So that's vague memory. I did like Daruk. Daruk and Urbosa were my 2 favorites. They felt like mom and dad. Urbosa felt like your mother that was just like this person that could do anything. And she's like, oh, it's just the thunder. I don't remember what she sounded like, but I'm going to make her sound like that. It's just the thunder. You go down to sleep. You go to sleep. It's just thunder. And then Daruk would be like, oh, well, it's all right, kid. Just, he slaps you in the back. It felt like an uncle, a dad figure. I like those 2 guys. Mifa made me a little uncomfortable. There's like a quasi romance stuff in there. I was like, what is this, a Sonic fandom all of a sudden?
Oh God, don't even go there, man.
You don't like sexy fish people?
I
What's
just call me old
I feel like
fashioned, but
I,
but she
I
felt
feel like
a
both
little
of us
bit like
say
a
that.
custom deviant art character to me, just to me. Okay, maybe it was Aonuma's like, oh, this is my own, custom character. Maybe I don't know. He's a Sonic character generator. What do you want to say, Ryan?
I just feel like you're pointing out the fact because I'm wearing a Sonic shirt right now that you're just
Ladies
like,
and gentlemen, let it be known, he's wearing a Sonic shirt on a Legend of Zelda podcast.
I have to go. I can't be here for this anymore.
what? It's like pajamas. It's like the most comfortable thing. All right, so we.
Well, you need to get a comfortable Zelda shirt. Like I'm wearing the original Legend of Zelda Link sprite shirt right now to fly my colors, sir. Okay, take that as a rebuttal.
Well, excuse me, princess.
A reference to a class.
For me, like, so Daruk, first of all, I love Daruk's design. I've always been a Goron fan because I'm also short and round, and I'm not as hard and made of rock as them. I'm much more squishy.
Because rock nipples are rock nipples.
They're the best. What are you talking about?
Oh, God.
Urbosa, you're right. You see, there was a right answer. Urbosa is the best champion in the game because, first of all, powerful female characters, right? And she has the, she's got kind of the two-piece thing going on and the skirt that goes across the side. She has a desert motif, but you never feel like it's exploitative in any way because she is a powerful warrior. Not only that, but that one scene where she has this awesome like older sister feel, but then at the end, like she wakes Zelda up anyway using her lightning, her Urbosa's fury, and like wakes her up, and she laughs about it, and she's got this mischievous side to her too. And have either of you played the DLC yet?
I haven't.
So all four characters have additional scenes that flesh them out a little bit more, that kind of show you different sides of them. And Urbosa has this awesome thing where she's fighting the Yiga clan. And it's just so cool.
I know. I love that. I love that.
Well, now I got to check out the DLC.
Yes, you have to. Do it. Do it now.
And the champ is okay. I will. And that's the end of this podcast episode. So let's change gears. At this moment in time, I wanted to touch briefly on the fact that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild won Game of the Year at last year's Game Awards. Now, I actually looked it up. This was the first time Nintendo ever won Game of the Year from the Game Awards, including its predecessor, the Spike Game Awards show, which ran as far back as 2003. So this is a huge deal for Nintendo, whereas previously they would dominate the family-friendly game section or the mobile game section, and they had two entries, right? Super Mario Odyssey was also a Game of the Year nominee at the Game Awards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
They were running against themselves basically.
Right. So now I think that the vocalness of the people that were contrary to Breath of the Wild, that didn't like it, was louder after this game won Game of the Year. Do you think that it winning Game of the Year affected people's impressions of it? And to what extent? And did it deserve to win Game of the Year in your opinion?
I'm pretty firmly entrenched in the Zelda community as far as like, and here's first rule number one about Zelda community is that when the game first comes out, there's a portion of people that everybody hates it. And then the next Zelda comes out, and then everybody's like, "Hey, that Zelda's okay, but we hate this new one." And it's a thing that literally happens every Zelda where you have.
So it's very much an old guard kind of fandom, is what it sounds like.
Right. I think people had just this idea because when the game first came out, you heard a lot of people say, "Well, but is it a Zelda game? Like, if you took the Zelda name away from it, would it have got Game of the Year?" I heard that a lot. Like, if you
Yeah,
took
it just won because it had Zelda in the title.
right, exactly. And I think a lot of people got salty because Horizon Zero Dawn, which was an absolutely amazing game,
Yeah.
got kind of snubbed on the award. So,
Yeah.
and
It came out in the wrong year. I mean, let's be frank. Like, it was running against Mario and Zelda. Are you kidding me? It too bad it didn't come out this year. I would have voted it down the ballot all the way.
I agree. Yeah.
But so this is an interesting tidbit, right? Like what I just said with Nintendo not winning Game of the Year previously. Now, in 2003, do you guys know? This is a little trivia for you off the cuff. What was Game of the Year from the Spike Video Game Awards show in 2003? Madden NFL 2004.
What?
Yeah, that was Game of the Year, and it beat out The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. That's crazy, right? So it's not. It's you. I don't think you can say that just because it has Zelda in the title, it'll win awards. Because previous Zeldas, that wasn't the case, right?
Well, what you see with the Game Awards now is a drastic departure, right? Since Geoff Keighley took it over and started running the game show, you actually have a more legitimate, like, these are games that gamers think are good. Back when it was Spike Awards, a lot of times Dude Bro Gamers games kind of won. Those like
it was all Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, all
like over and over and over. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those games, but like they're not necessarily what we would probably consider Game of the Year typically, because they come out every year. They're very serialized and they don't typically innovate in any way. But but you look at now today, right? We have 6 games on the ballot right now for Game of the Year, and one of them is Celeste, which is an indie game with a story about depression. So, I mean,
well, it's beautiful that Celeste is up for Game of the Year, even if it doesn't win. That is such a huge accomplishment for indies.
Right, and it's up there with games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and God of War and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I mean, like, Celeste is hanging with the big dogs, and it wasn't even, nobody even looked at it and said, "Oh, that doesn't belong there." Everybody's like, "Yeah, that belongs there."
That's so cool. Yeah. So now fan expectations. That's something that we were talking about recently in Discord, and it's not my intention to dredge up a 5-hour conversation that we had. That was one of those galactic. Okay, so this bears explaining to some listeners. We have a Mage chat on Discord, which is rocking. Like every day it's active, and that's super cool. We're keep expanding it, and new people keep joining. But the only way to join is either becoming a Mage contributor or becoming a Patreon patron, becoming a Warrior of Light. So you can check those two things out. If you're curious, I'm just going to say we have the best conversations. They are the best for sure. And one of the conversations that we had involved a lot. It involved defining games by genre, defining games by titles, by character presence, getting into things like, we could say, is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild a Zelda game? That's something you touched on earlier, Daniel, right? So let me ask you, is Breath of the Wild a Zelda game?
Absolutely. And the reason why isn't just because it has Zelda in the title, and it's not because it has Link as a main character. Zelda has a few different pillars it's always rested on, right? Exploration. Right. From the very first Zelda, even the weird Zeldas like Zelda 2, they're always about exploration of some kind, about finding secrets in the world, about exploring and engaging with the world. They're also always about some kind of puzzle involved, some kind of active puzzle solving that you have to do. There's usually some kind of dungeon mechanic, and here they were very different dungeons, but I would personally argue better dungeons in the way that the shrines were, not necessarily the divine beasts, which we can get into, but it was very much a Zelda game. Plus, it had something indicative of the 3D once we had more story in Zelda, right? Quirky characters, right? They're in there. The charm of Zelda, it's in there. So the fabric that makes Zelda Zelda is there. We had open world, we had sword play, we had all that. Everything that made Zelda Zelda was in that game.
Right, and I agree. In my opinion, Zelda 2 is less like what you'd think of to be a Zelda game than Breath of the Wild.
I have to add a side note here. Zelda 2 is my favorite Zelda. So
is it?
Yes.
Okay, and that's fine. I'm not saying that Zelda 2 is a terrible game in the presence of these gems. But I'm saying
I'm
that
just messing around.
Are you? Is Zelda 2 your
Yeah.
favorite?
Well, it was the very first Zelda I've ever played.
Okay.
So it has.
So that's interesting to know.
Yeah.
Well, but the point being, would you say that Zelda 2 is distinctive out of the entire series?
I would say so. Yes, it's very, very, very distinctive. It's virtually a departure from what we traditionally call Zelda, but
even to today.
Yeah, even today. But here's a bit of a caveat here. You can see a lot of the elements. You can see a lot of elements of Zelda 2 in Breath of the Wild, and I specifically referenced the jump because in previous Zelda games you weren't able to jump. In Zelda 2, you were able to jump. In Breath of the Wild, you're able to jump.
You can jump in my favorite Zelda game. Do you know what my favorite Zelda game was?
Please don't tell me it's one of Gamelin.
No, come on. It's Link's Awakening is my favorite Zelda.
I forgot about that one too. I love that one. You could
jump on that one. My favorite Zelda game, haunting, beautiful, elegant, sassy. Anyway, but you see my point though, that Zelda 2 is a very distinctive Zelda, and I think less distinctive. Okay, this is difficult to hash out, but I think that Zelda 2 is more different from the entire series than Breath of the Wild is. Let's say it in those terms, in my opinion.
I can agree with you, Ellen.
Yeah. So that's not saying like qualitatively, that like Zelda 2 is at the bottom, whatever. I haven't played much of it, so I can't, deliver criticism to it or against it or whatever. But it seems to me that there's massive differences in Zelda 2 compared with Breath of the Wild, which I think is an extension of a lot of what we've seen in Zelda before, like I mentioned with the very first Legend of Zelda game. So I would agree too. I mean, this is definitely a Zelda game. In my opinion, most importantly, because the developers said it is, and it's their thing. Like, even if tomorrow they come out with, they're like, oh, here's the next Zelda game. It's called Zelda NASCAR Burn Rubber. And you're just like, and it's just like, a racing game, but you race across this open world to find like racing dungeons. Like, if they say it's a Zelda game, man, it's a Zelda game. But because the risk being then where you have people who say, and I want to kind of pick your guys' brains on this. Some people who will mention Breath of the Wild is a good game, but a horrible Zelda. Kind of got that gist from a few people on Twitter, Rutana and Striker Caden. A good game, but not a good Zelda game. What's your opinion on that? We've kind of heard from you, Ryan, about Zelda and its Breath of the Wild and its place in Zelda the series. What about you, Ryan? What do you think about that? Not a good Zelda game.
Oh, I vehemently disagree. This is a very, very good Zelda game. And I'm not saying just because of where it lies in the timeline. It's just how it was presented. It's reminiscent of the original Legend of Zelda in the fact that you're not given a lot of things. You're not given a lot of information. You're not given a lot of things. You're just you have an old man. You given a sword, and you're just like go forth, and then you just find yourself evolving within the game. And so as we speak of the original Legend of Zelda, so too do we speak of Breath of the Wild. It's just in a more grander sense. in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Daniel? What do you think about that? Not a good Zelda game.
Ooh, buddy. Okay, so you know what? I'm willing to go out on a limb and make the big statement. So,
Here we
not
go.
only is it a good Zelda game, in my opinion, and obviously everybody has different opinions, it's the best Zelda game. And it claims that for a number of different reasons, right? And I can't explain to you why it should be, to anybody else, why it should be their favorite Zelda game. I can just tell you it's my favorite Zelda.
Right.
And why I think it's an evolution of the franchise, not necessarily a step away from what made the franchise good, which is how a lot of people feel, right?
Right.
Because it is very different from your traditional 3D Zelda that most of the people that said about this Zelda, what they consider their Zelda, right? Like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, which again, drastic departure from the series and how it was played out. And they and funny thing is, this isn't even the first Zelda that does this. That really, they started experimenting with Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword and Link Between Worlds. They started working on shaking up this entire franchise. Because in Skyward Sword, you had sort of open worlds, and you would have, what you would do is you'd go to this open area, and your dungeon had kind of already started, but you were in just an open world. And so you were solving puzzles in that world, and then you got into the dungeons. They were smaller affairs, and you also backtracked through them a couple times during the game. And then in Link Between Worlds, you, just like in Breath of the Wild, you have the opportunity to get most, if not all, of your items up front and rent those before you actually find them in the game. You can go dungeons in certain orders. Like dungeons will tell you, hey, you need a hook shot here. But just like Breath of the Wild, like you were given your tool set at the start and said, go do what you want, solve these puzzles the way you want to solve them.
Yeah. There's less of almost like a Metroidvania-ish thing where you collect certain items and it allows you to progress to new areas. Giving you all your tools right at the beginning was something I initially found disappointing in Breath of the Wild. I was like, oh, well, that's it. Now I got everything. But I did not initially realize the level of complexity that you could derive from those basic set of tools, so that all these different situations are like, okay, well, now you got to think about how you want to use them. I think that this answers a question we got from Retro Game Brews, which was, how does Breath of the Wild rank compared to the rest of the franchise? Daniel, you went out on a limb and said the big words, the best Zelda. I don't know. I don't know if I could say at this point in time what the best Zelda is. What about you, Ryan?
I mean, my love for Zelda to aside, I wholeheartedly agree with Daniel here. It is the best Zelda, best Zelda ever, and I mean I can say that with all of my heart. I mean I've played so much Zelda that like it's boggled my mind. But yes, this is the best Zelda, best.
Another question we got. I think this is one we sort of covered too. Just want to get these last several questions out, make sure we address them. This is from Writer's View on Twitter, aka Blue Williams. How do you balance a series' need to evolve while staying true to its roots? I think we kind of touched on that too, with talk about a Breath of the Wild sequel and how we would envision also that possibly being distinctive from another Zelda title. That I think there's a lot they could learn from Breath of the Wild, but then at the same time, maybe the next one shouldn't have breakable items, breakable weapons. What did you guys think about weapon durability?
Well, I hate to always be the first one to speak up, but
Go ahead.
When it comes to breakable weapons, I think a lot of people looked at it originally and was like, before they even played the game, were like, I don't like this. I don't like this thing that
right. And we actually did hear from people that said specifically that they did not want to play it because of the breakable weapons.
Right. And I actually had a personal friend I know that didn't want to play the game originally because of weapons breaking. Then he played it, and after he was done, he still said, "Well, I don't really like it as much, but I didn't think it was as big a deal as I did when I first started the game." And to me, weapons breaking is absolutely essential to how Breath of the Wild plays. Because if you don't have the breakable weapons, you don't ever have to experiment in battle. You don't have to ever like try anything different. Everybody would just equip the Master Sword, and that's all they would use the rest of the game.
Right.
If it didn't break. And even the Master Sword in this game times out. Like you can only use it X amount of times before you're on a cooldown timer basically.
Right. And that was genius of them to put the Master Sword so much further into the game, so you have to really spend time experimenting with those weapons. Now, a simple question that I would ask people who hated the weapon durability, who have played this game, is, was there ever a point that you ran out of weapons? I didn't.
Nope.
Yeah.
Never have.
Yeah. Because there are so many weapons. Most enemies will drop a weapon. It's easy to find weapons in towns and treasure chests, what have you. I mean, go knock on a tree and you can find weapons. And then using your abilities in different ways too allows you to vanquish enemies. Plus, not every. So, like, let's put it this way: Breath of the Wild is not a hack and slash. Breath of the Wild is a survival game. You are to survive this wild. You are to experiment with your surroundings and with your basic tools. Like on a grander scale, that Eventide Island, like we were talking about at the start of the game, that island is just this game, but in a microcosm. The whole game is essentially that island, because you're still given a limited set of tools and a limited set of weapons even, but you have to figure out how to use them wisely. So it's not just a game that you can run into every single battle and just mash A until you're done. And maybe people were expecting that. Kind of bridges back upon fan expectations. Maybe people were expecting you to just be able to kill everything. But you can't. And you shouldn't necessarily. Because that's not sort of what the whole game is about. It's about the experimentation more than the action. At least that's how I'd phrase it.
No, I think you nailed it. And by the time I was 7 hours into the game, I was basically weapon Oprah in a bokoblin camp. I was like, and you get a weapon, and you get a weapon, and you get a weapon. But I mean, like, first of all, the breakable weapons, what it does is it allows you to have chests that actually matter in this. Because in previous the rupees, people would have as rupees don't matter in those Zelda games, right? So when you go to a chest, there's no mystery. You open the chest, you're either getting a heart, you're getting some kind of rupee, or if it's in a dungeon, you're getting basically the key, whatever item that is, to complete the dungeon. So this allowed you to open a chest and get an awesome flaming double-handed sword or a katana or something that's different from just saying, okay, and the same thing with the armor. It gave you stuff that you could actually receive in these chests that meant something to you, other than just, hey, this is another thing. And as far as your point about it made you experiment, like the Hinox, right? He has cloth on it wrapped around his leg. If you set that cloth on fire, he can no longer block his eye because he's too busy trying to pat out the fire that's on his legs. And so, like you said, it does those clever things to make you experiment, to let you experiment in the game. And for the people who do want to play that way, I think they would find that eventually it doesn't matter. You have so many weapons that you can go to town. You may lose your best weapon you have, but then you'll get the new one 5 seconds later that's better than what you had or on par with it.
Right. As Retro GIF Monster on Twitter said, breakable weapons are not an issue. There are so many in this game that I don't think you'll ever be stressed out to run out. It's easy to get sort of anxious about your weapons and be like, oh, I need to store up these laser swords because those are freaking cool and who knows when I'll find another one again. But you don't need to. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to put your survival ahead of having just an item sitting in your inventory. So let's shift gears here, starting to wrap things up. I just want to get your guys' main gripes with the game. Did you have any major criticism, anything that you would change if you could change something about Breath of the Wild?
Daniel, you want to go first?
It's the hard one because I really don't have anything. Even the main complaint that most people had that loved the game, I disagreed with. So
That being
for me,
the weapons?
the dungeons.
Oh, the dungeons. Okay.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly disagreed with that. So I just don't have. I'll be honest with you. And typically, this isn't a thing for me. I always have something, even if I love a game. But there was nothing in Breath of the Wild that I was like, okay, actually, you know what? I'll give you one thing, so I just don't sound like a raving fanboy, right?
Oh, thank goodness. Whew.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The
Dodged the bullet.
on the DLC, I was a little disappointed with what was presented, and I don't know if that was because I was so excited to see what they were going to do next, like if they were going to be playable champions. I kind of let my imagination run wild, but some of the stuff that they have you doing became really tedious towards the end, because you're like finding certain places on the map and things like that to get to the more interesting shrines and things like that. I think that could have been better paced, but in the main game, I really didn't have any big complaints within that. What about you?
Ryan, how about you?
Oh man, I'm struggling to find anything in this game that I could like really complain about, but I honestly can't.
So yeah, and we're not
because
talking like necessarily like I hated that, but yeah,
It-
anything that you
even-
just felt like disappointing, anything that you could change, if you could change anything.
To be honest, like I would not change a thing on this game. I cannot find a single thing. Like I can't think of a single instance where I'd like to see something change within it.
Bro,
Just-
you wouldn't cast Emma Stone as Zelda? I'm just-
You know what? I did think of something.
Okay.
voice acting. If you could change the voice
Okay,
acting,
all
if you
right,
could,
all right.
okay, if you could tweak the voice acting, like
All
get
right, all
Emily Blunt as Zelda, get
Like Labby.
Ryan Reynolds as Link. I don't know. I couldn't think of anybody on the spot. Elijah Wood as Link.
This game you're casting, I don't want anything to do with.
Okay, so for myself, I will definitely say voice acting. It has its moments, but it also has its definite weaknesses. That was, I think, the one or two spots that I knocked a point off in my original critique of it. Was just 1 point off from the audio for a few moments in the voice acting. I wish that there were more in-depth dungeons. The Divine Beast dungeons were real cool in that gimmick of being able to control the beasts and affect how the dungeon layout worked, affect how that structure worked. I just wanted there to be more of it. It felt like I finished that real quick and then I was just back to the shrines. I like the shrines though. I'm not one of the people who are just like, oh, the shrines, they're not dungeons at all. I like that, and I wish that in the next Zelda we kind of get a mix of that. We kind of get maybe not so many shrines. They were cool as rewards though. You know, we're like, oh, I found a lake. Oh, this lake is shaped like a weird shape. Oh, if I go down this peninsula on this lake, oh, there's a thing here. Oh, and then you activate it and boom, suddenly there's a shrine you didn't know that was there. So something like that, that's real cool. But I kind of want a little bit more of longer or deeper or more structured or complex dungeon design. And then this one, I don't know if you guys have heard this before. I didn't really like the horse riding. I liked it, but I didn't like that you had to keep tapping a button to get through the spurs, and then those would run out, and then you'd be like, well, now I gotta wait. I don't know. It just felt like a little like it could have been something else. I don't know. Maybe it's the horses would have their own stamina bar. I don't know. I don't know what I would even change about that, but I was just like, it's just horse riding. Could have been something, but that's definitely not major. So that's gripes. Let's get into these final questions.
Now that you said the shrines, right? I
Yeah.
have to. I realized I do have a gripe with this game. So if Nintendo is listening, I want you to take the developer that worked on the motion control shrines and you put him in a corner and you tell him that's a bad developer. And he sits in the corner.
Okay, yeah, you know what? That's true. I do have a crap about them.
So you didn't like the motion control shrines were like the ones where you had to guide a ball through that little like mini maze. You didn't like that?
You know what the funny thing is? I did what I used to do with those kind of toys when I was little. I like used the physics to jump the ball over half the maze and get it through the hole. And I'm like, yes, I never want to do this thing again. And so luckily there was like 5 or 6 of them in the game. But every time I was like, I kind of did the eye squint at the game. Like, really? You're making me do this again?
Yeah. Well, 120 shrines. I mean, they reused certain gimmicks. So like I'm saying, I bring back the shrines in whatever form, like a little miniature reward dungeon. But maybe not so many so we didn't have to see so much repeated, and then beef up the main dungeons so that it feels more like an event. It already did, but just a little more is always good. Okay, so here's a wonky question. This is a wacky question right here. This is from Miao Te Ching on Twitter, who asked, let's pretend Ganon takes over the world, imagination, and turns you and your friends into one of his baddies, but you get a choice. What bad guy do you turn into from The Legend of Zelda? I read that question. I was like, sweet. I don't know, though. So I'm going to say like an evil Zora, because that was like the Zora, minus Mifa. As I mentioned earlier, it's just weird. But the Zora are cool. I have an affinity for water. I have +5 water damage. It's on my birth certificate. But I like the Zora, so that's what I'm going to say. What about you, Ryan?
Lionel.
A Lionel? I could see you being a Lionel. Just like running around with coffee all the time, just being like, like chasing down the hero of time.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, that would be me.
Okay.
Instead of swords, I just have like gallons of coffee just chugging down.
All right, Daniel.
Well, that's a tough question. Are we just talking Breath of the Wild enemies, or are we talking like all the enemies through all of the
Zelda know what? Games? There wasn't even an evil Zora in Breath of the Wild, was there? I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so just whatever, dude.
So just whoever. Well, you know what? I'm gonna. Oh, how I can't be Ganon? Dang it!
No, you can't, because he was the one who turned you into. You could be past version of Ganon. You could be like super nose Ganon from Ocarina of Time.
Can I be Ganondorf from the Legend of the Hyrule Warriors game? Because that dude was one bad mamma jamma.
That'd be pretty cool. I think it would be cool to be the original Link skeleton boss fight that you fought in Twilight Princess, I think it was. Remember, it was something like, oh, this is the first Link, or I don't know. It's been years. Okay, next question. This is from Lodestar Valor, who, shout out to Lodestar Valor, was going to be on this podcast, but we just could not get the scheduling to work. So this is for you, whoever you are, Lodestar Valor. Shine on, you crazy diamond. He said, would you have been willing to buy a Wii U if you knew how good this game was, but it wasn't available on the Switch? I love that question because I really dislike the Wii U. It's the only Nintendo console I've never owned, and I don't have too much desire to. I think that it's a cool system with a lot of cool exclusives, some cool exclusives, I'll say. But man, what a marketing fail. They needed to do something completely different. Don't call it the Wii U. Don't put out these crappy commercials where you can't even tell like what's going on or what this device is for. But there are a lot of games now that I really want to play on the Wii U, and I'd be down, you know? So if Breath of the Wild released on the Wii U alone and not the Switch, I probably would have bought a Wii U. Yeah.
Well, my answer is pretty easy, but it really, how long do you want this podcast to be?
Right. So we can't get into We can't get into a Wii U defense.
Right, we can't get a Wii U defense. I already owned a Wii U, so and Wii U is my favorite Nintendo console outside the Switch. So for
Really?
me, yeah,
I didn't know that. Why?
Yes, it has. If you own one like me, it has a stellar lineup of games. In fact, it was a return to form from the Wii era for me, as far as like bringing back games that hardcore gamers. That's a terrible statement, right? Just
hardcore
that
gamers.
We wanted, hardcore gamers. I think people knew what I was talking about, but in general, bringing back the kind of games that people liked on the GameCube, not the shovelware kind of stuff, was just blue ocean, right?
See, when I think of Wii U, I think of like Zombies U and the Arkham Wii U and like Donkey Kong Country Returns or Tropical Freeze, is it? Was one that I thought of that was like, yeah, I would love to play a Wii U for that. And Smash Brothers, I would love to play a Wii U for that. But it feels to me like, gosh, this is going to turn to like a Wii U conversation.
You can cut all this. Maybe this is just for us, but you know.
This is for the world. This is for the world. I don't know. It feels like I could name like between 5 and 10 games that I'd want to play for sure on the Wii U. And then it's got a bunch of like ports from other systems and other games that are like, this looks like wonky. But I think setting that aside, we should have a Wii U podcast. That would be pretty cool. And we'll talk about the Wii U. We'll get like, we'll do a point counterpoint. Maybe it should be a side quest episode. That could be cool.
I'm on that side quest.
Yes.
What about you, Ryan? Would you have bought a Wii U to play Breath of the Wild?
Well, I'm in luck. My brother has a Wii U, so.
You don't have a Wii U?
My brother has a Wii U.
How dare you not own a Wii U?
What?
How dare you be one of not 10,000 people who bought a Wii U? How dare you?
I just said my brother has it, so if I really wanted to, I could just snatch it from him myself.
You could have played it. Yeah, you could play it. For that. So, we need to have a Wii U podcast episode because that would be legit. I know the moronic cheese mage, aka Professional Moron, is also a Wii U, a big Wii U fan. I'm trying to think of who else is like a Wii U. Not hater. I don't want to classify myself as like a Wii U hater. But I don't hate it. I just, marketing. I think we could agree, Daniel, that the marketing needed to be a lot better.
The marketing was terrible on that system.
Yeah. I mean, if the marketing could have upheld that console, then and they pushed more units, then maybe it could have had some really, really great. They're like, I must have a Wii U. The only game that told me ever I must have a Wii U is Smash Brothers because it had Mega Man in it, and I was like, Mega Man in Smash Brothers. It was a must have, but not for like $300 or however much it was. I like having $300 more than Smash Brothers.
I could say the same thing, but about Cloud. The moment I saw Cloud in Smash, I was like, no, I must resist the urge to buy.
But you didn't buy a Wii U. You did. You resisted there. Okay, we need to have a Wii U podcast. Let's move on. This is the final question, ladies and gentlemen. This is from Fritzstalgia on Twitter, who asked, the piano-focused original soundtrack and audio cues, yay or nay? How'd you guys dig the soundtrack?
I loved it. I genuinely love the piano-inspired, like the piano-heavy direction of the soundtrack. It's just because the piano is a very beautiful instrument.
Yes.
It's
the best instrument, let me say, as a pianist.
Right. Okay. But yes, an incredibly beautiful and wonderful instrument that you can play things in such a grand scale, or you can just strip it down and play it very minimally. And what I enjoyed about the soundtrack was just how minimalist the audio was. And like, take for example the temple. When you go to the Temple of Time, like when I first went in there, I'm like, shouldn't like there be a Temple of Time theme kind of going on? It's just like these single slow notes, right? But then when you stick around long enough and you listen to it and you just like absorb it in, you realize that this is a very somber and very defeatist version of the Temple of Time, because again it's in ruins, it's a decrepit ruin now, and so the soundtrack really reflects how the world is post Ganon, post Calamity Ganon, as we'd say, right? So I cannot stop thinking about the soundtrack and just how beautiful that piano sounds, and how it just kind of guides you along the way, even like with the horse riding and everything. Like that, I have no idea who in the world was the pianist from this, but how they did the like, I don't know how to explain it, but
like that galloping,
yes,
yeah,
that like
that galloping like rhythm.
Yeah, it sounded like you were riding.
I'm not going to try and sing it.
I can't either, so don't worry. But it was just perfect. I cannot. I'm just full stop right there. It's just perfect. I'm just going to ramble on if I get a chance to. But I'm just going to stop.
It's a great soundtrack. I know that there's a large group that wanted to see more of the ba 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 da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba 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 ba, but we've seen that so many times. I think skipping it for one game, or skipping it at such a prevalence for one game, isn't gonna hurt anybody, and it's not gonna hurt the Legend of Zelda. Certainly as a series. After all, this game won Game of the Year, but for the next thing, if they mix it up with the sound, if they try new things, those are good things to do. It's good to try new things. It's good to evolve. I would have liked to see a little bit more of the classic themes, sure, but I don't think that they will permanently be missed. What do you think, Daniel, on the music?
It actually has one of my favorite pieces from all the Zelda games. Cass is one of my favorite characters in all of Zelda, period. I almost got a tattoo of the Birdman. So
is that the guy that plays the accordion? Is it?
Yes. The absolutely amazing design of that character is fantastic by itself. But the best song in the game is actually essentially a reward for completing his quest line, because his quest line is a series of doing these little dungeons because he's traveling the world. His mentor helped him do this song, right? Well, if you do all these quests for him and you take him back to the main village, Rito village, right, and you find his children and stuff, they all have these pieces of the song, and then at the end he's like, do you want me to sing it for you? You're like, yeah, sure. Well, so he starts off with the same accordion music you hear through the entire game, and he has all the lyrics to it now, and it's a story of the 10,000 years before Link and Zelda that defeated Ganon, and then the Link and Zelda from 100 years ago, and then what you're going through now. And then somewhere in the middle of that transition, that accordion music that you've been hearing the whole game speeds up just slightly in the third part, and suddenly you're listening to a rendition of the main theme tied into Cass's theme. Yeah. That is, if you guys haven't heard it just because you haven't done the quest line to completion, go look it up on YouTube. It is amazing. The Ballad of Champions with Cass is just out of this world, in my opinion.
Yeah, so it's like the themes are in there, right? Because I can recall there were times when I was like, oh, this is, Zelda's Lullaby or what have you. Right. They're in there, but they're mixed in such a way where the music evolves based on your actions and where you're moving and what you're doing, so that it's not as prevalent. It's not like there's a soundtrack just looping constantly as you're walking through the field, which is kind of great, because imagine listening to the Legend of Zelda theme song for that long. I mean, you spend 200 hours in this game. It's a great track, but few tracks, if any, could hold up for 200 hours. So in closing, gentlemen, name, if you can, a game that you would highly recommend, or recommend at all, I guess, that's similar to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Let's start with you, Daniel.
Oh man. Okay, so there's a number of ways you can take that, but Assassin's Creed Odyssey takes a lot of cues from Breath of the Wild. In fact, in the game, there's actually a Korok that they've made and their style to pay homage to the Breath of the Wild.
I saw that picture. That's pretty cool.
Right, they actually have 2 modes now. They have Explore and they have like just story. So you can have like the mini map come up and just tell you where to go exactly, or they can give you cues of kind of where to go, and it's up to you to like navigate the world. So they kind of taken hints from that, and you can climb everything in that game. There's no stamina meter, but there's no roads in that game that are cut off to you. And Origins does the same thing, but Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I think, is an evolution of that. And I think it's the closest thing I've seen to Breath of the Wild since Breath of the Wild came out. And I think you're going to keep seeing that in open world games. They're going to keep borrowing from Breath of the Wild.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. Ryan.
Well, okay. Again, you can preface it with so much, but I guess a game that would be similar. I might be stealing it from you or whatever, but probably Horizon Zero Dawn.
Have you played it?
No, that's the thing. I have not played it.
That's
I
my
still
game.
have to
No,
play
just
it.
kidding. No.
I still have to play it.
Yeah, the comparisons are pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I think actually, Daniel, it was you that made the remark. They're like, they're completely different games. They're both about like an elfin hero that like wakes up in this dystopian world that's controlled by all these wacky tentacled machines, and you have to go and fight this like nameless evil entity spirit thing. And and it's just like surviving in the wild and all that. I was like, essentially they're the same game. There are a lot of similarities between the two. And a lot of differences, obviously, too. But that was one of 2 I wrote down just in case somebody said it. So you could have it. But so I wrote down the original Legend of Zelda. I'm cheating maybe to name a game from the same series, but the Legend of Zelda on the NES, the first game, still good fun to play. I play it all the time, and it's a lot like Breath of the Wild in that it throws you down into the middle of this map. It is Eventide Island. Throws you down and say, all right, now go survive, go look for whatever it is you're going to look for, go collect items, go build up your tool set, and go and think laterally about all these different puzzles and these different problems that you have to solve and start finding things. And so it's very much like Breath of the Wild in a nutshell, in my opinion. And that ties up just about everything on this podcast. So thank you guys for joining me on this episode of MageCast. Daniel, where can we find you one more time?
I'm on Home Button Gaming, which is you can Google it. It'll be okay.
Okay. We get a little bit of that SEO in there. What about you, Ryan? Where can we find you?
Again, you can find me on Games with Coffee. Find me on Twitter, GamesWCoffee, and Instagram, Games_with_coffee.
All right. And and Instagram, you did just launch a branch of Instagram for the Well-Read Mage brand, and I really appreciate that you're doing like this amazing job with that. So super cool stuff.
Yeah, thanks for letting me do this. I'm actually really happy to do this because it also helps me with my Instagram game as well too. And I mean, come on, it's Instagram, it's fun, right? So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so if you want to have cool conversations like we have on a regular basis with people just like Ryan and Daniel in Mage Chat, then go check out patreon.com/thewellreadmage. I am the Well-Read Mage, Moses, the hero of time, Norton. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. I hope you enjoyed that episode of MageCast as much as I did. If so, please follow, subscribe, share, and leave us a review to help us reach a wider audience. If you enjoy our work, please consider supporting us and our vision for the future of gaming conversations through patreon.com/thewellreadmage. Special thanks to my Mage League colleague Brent Mead for sound editing. The MageCast theme song, Post Atmosphere, was composed by fellow mage Russell Gordon and can be found on his YouTube and SoundCloud. This episode may be over, but the legend will live on, passed down by the dwarves, the elves, and the dragons.